Hello, everyone. Again, this is 194. This is our second class from Wednesday, October 21st, where today this is a short discussion focused on Adam's Curse by William Butler Yates. Yates rhymes with Gates. We listened last time at the end of our class to an online recording of another Irish speaker. Yates himself was Irish. There are some recordings of Yates that you can find online, and we might even listen to some of them in the course of the semester. He was a towering figure of what's called modernism. We're only going to talk about the periods of poetry at the end of our course. I'll give you, by the end of our semester, a general framework for the different periods of literature. They're kind of arbitrary to begin with, but Yates is a figure who lived in the very end of the 19th century, but was his key years of activity were in the beginning of the 20th century, exactly 100 years ago. He was a key figure in English poetry, although he was Irish, and there is an Irish language, let's not forget it. And 100 years ago, Ireland was consumed, it was preoccupied it was a very political place. And that remained so in Ireland until the 1990s, actually. From the 19-teens until the 1990s, Ireland had a very bitter dispute, a kind of civil war, also involved a foreign power. It's not unlike actually what's happening in our regions too, where Ireland had aspirations of independence from British colonialism. The British ruled Ireland for many years, and Irish culture, Irish language, Irish identity were major figures, and Yates himself participated in all this. He also became, in many ways, the leading English language poet of his day, of the 19-teens, 1920s, and his poetry is very innovative and in some ways very harsh, can be very stark. It also captures a lot of what was happening in those decades of 100 years ago. Beauty, violence, political identity, gender, these are key ideas that come up with him. But he also is always concerned with language, consciousness, the imagination, wisdom, the tradition of reading, and some of the ideas that are being discussed in your 193 historical backgrounds class, Professor Kohlbrenner, and that I discuss. We teach those classes actually in tandem. We're always in touch with each other just about every day to see what you guys are doing. We're in each other's WhatsApp groups, and just to keep tabs on it. So the ideas about the tradition, glory, the classical motifs that you're starting to learn about in 193, the Iliad, these are things that Yates was very strongly interested in as well. Some of that is apparent in this poem. Let's take a look at the poem. The text is, and we can find it here. I'm going to stop sharing the computer sound since I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to have the text read it. We're going to look at it. I'm actually going to ask you guys to read it. So here's the before class, and I actually I'll do this next week. We got through 1 through 2 last time, and today we're doing Adam's Curse, and you watched already. We already did 3A and 3B. Oh, this should have been 3B, excuse me, 3B. The video discussion is your preparation, which was the conversation. For next week, it's not my wife and me. I'm actually not involved in it. The model conversation that we're going to have for next week that you'll watch before Monday, and obviously I will post all of this over the weekend. I will also send it to you in an email, is a class conversation in the United States talking about an American poet. And it too, when you watch it, I just want to mention this, should be an example of the kind of level we can aspire to. It's very hard, and especially hard this year with what we're doing. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask for volunteers to read each of the sections. So we're going to start, we sat until martyrs call the world. Then thereupon to enough. That'll be volunteer 2. And then 3 and 4, we sat to years, and then I and moon. So let me go to the grid view so I can see you guys. Can I see everyone? We'll stop share for a second so I can see it, just that I can see everyone. Can people put up their hands either in participants list or on their screen? I want 1, Tamar, thank you. Danielle, 2, Itamar, 3, and Asala, 4. Amuna, a little slow on the trigger. All right, Tamar, take it away. Let's go back to sharing screen. You are 1, Danielle is 2, Itamar is part 3, and Asala is part 4. All right, I will mute myself. Unmute yourself, please, Tamar.
We sat together at one summer's end, that beautiful mild woman, your close friend, and you and I, and talked of poetry. I said, a line will take us hours maybe. Yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Better go down upon your marrow bones and scrub a kitchen pavement or break stones like an old pauper in all kinds of weather. For to articulate sweet sounds together is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler by the noisy set of bankers, schoolmasters, and clergymen, the martyrs call the world.
And thereupon that beautiful mild woman, for whose sake there's man, good. And thereupon that beautiful mild woman, for whose sake there's many a one shall find out all heartache. On finding that her voice is sweet and low, replied, to be born woman is to know. Although they do not talk of it at school, that we must labor to be beautiful. I said, it's certain there is no fine thing since Adam's fall, but needs much laboring. There have been lovers who thought love should be so much compounded of high courtesy, that they would sigh and quote with learned looks precedents out of beautiful old books, yet now it seems an idle trade enough.
Itamar.
Quiet at the name of love, we saw the last embers of daylight die, and in the trembling blue-green of the sky, a moon, worn as if it had been a shell, washed by time's waters as they rose and fell about the stars and broke in days and years.
I had a thought for no one's but your ears, that you were beautiful and that I strove to love you in the old highway of love, that it had all seemed happy, and yet we'd grown as weary-hearted as that hollow moon.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Applause for our virtual applause for our volunteers. Thank you guys. Everyone will have a chance. Everyone will be required to do this. And about the readings, great job. I don't expect perfect English. That was perfect English, but try your best, and people can recognize. You can hear already. This is also what we're going to discuss in 20 minutes or so. There are a wide range of people, of accents and forms of English that are represented even in our group of 36 people or so. Okay, Mohammed, do you have a question, or are you just applauding? Do you want to say something? I see your hand is up. Do you want to share something, Mohammed? Unmute yourself. Can't hear. You're not on mute, but still we can't hear you. The microphone's not connected. And a question I actually want to ask, I have my points I'm going to say. Some of it was in the conversation with my wife, but I'm going to start by asking you guys. So I'm glad Mohammed has something to say. What do you make of the poem? We'll talk about, I'll do first, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do a 1 minute, very basic explanation. I'll refer to the points raised in the video, and then I'm going to go to why I'm using it. All right, Mohammed, are you all set? Let's see if we can hear you now. No.
He responded in the chat that he raised his hand as a volunteer to read.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so let me put it back down. I'll do that for you. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, if anybody, so now open floor, both in chat, and here's what I was saying the other day. We can get a lot of input very quickly. People are welcome to respond in chat or on the conversation. This is the kind of vague question that professors like to ask. What do you make of the poem? Okay. All right. People have something to say. You can raise your hands in the participants list, or you can raise your hands on the screen. Either way, using the thumbs up. What are people's initial responses to it? All right, let's go. Sarah, then Yuval. And you can tell me, by the way, if your name is Sarah or Sarah. I'm not sure. Okay.
It's Sarah.
There. Go ahead.
It's a very multi-layered poem, as like the conversation you and your wife brought up as well. It's like there's many different themes and conversations going on, which is really interesting. It's like global with what it is to be a poet in this world. Where does a poet fit? Is it appreciated? And then there's the more intimate, personal conversation with his friends, and then with this woman of what beauty is and what a woman's experience of beauty is, and what beauty is for a poet, and what we aspire to in this world with beauty. So those were my impressions.
Excellent, excellent. And we're going to get to this point of how the text makes that transition, how the text flows from the opening ideas about poetry, which is why it's in our course at this time, in our second meeting. But we'll get to after Yuval's point, and Tamar wants to say something also about how it makes that transition from poetry to beauty to some very universal claims about knowledge, learning, and the nature of the world. Yuval, the floor is yours. You can say whatever you wish.
So there was something that both you and your wife said during the video that I also got while reading the poem, which was when the woman was telling the poet that women have it's already ingrained in them to try hard to look a certain way, to look at a decent way. When beforehand it seemed that the poet kind of started realizing how hard it is to start working in a way to look beautiful, like the flowers. He just started noticing it, while a lot of times women start noticing it a lot sooner than what he seemed, or what the general male ideas
the male
are,
gaze
I guess.
takes in. So
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. I never thought of that, and that's why these conversations are wonderful. I've been teaching and thinking of this text for years, but the notion that it's about the attention and the sort of negligence of what people take in. People ignore poetry. Men ignore women's beauty until it is sort of presented and packaged for them. So the so-called wandering, the wandering male gaze that is lazy for the most part, but only when it's presented. Like, oh, look at the red carpet, look at the starlet there, look at the Nobel Prize winner now. But for the most part, it disregards all the beauty that is in the world. Excellent point, Yuval. Something I never thought of in years. We go to Tamar, and then Gabriel, and then Eden.
I just see this. It didn't hit me at first, just like you and your wife had said that you're first assaulted with the sheer beauty of a poem when you read it for the first time, the lyricism and just the beauty of the written word. But upon examining it afterwards, something that I hadn't noticed at first is this underlying the hard work that poets put into things. And I find it interesting because he makes this point that nothing is really beautiful unless it requires a certain amount of effort. The more effort you put into something, the greater the reward. And so on the one hand, he's acknowledging that you have to work very, very hard in order to create something that is of true beauty. But he also feels like he's not appreciated for that. So I would think that he would applaud himself for his hard work and acknowledge the beauty that he creates on his own. Yet he's looking for so much appreciation from the outside world. There's sort of this dichotomy of his lack of self-appreciation, but he knows that he needs to really find that within himself in order to appreciate what he's done. Just something I thought of.
Excellent idea. Wonderful. Gabriella, Eden.
Okay, so I had this idea that can you hear me, by the way? Do I sound good? Okay, fine. Thank you. So also when your wife was talking about seeing the beauty of a poem in the beginning you don't necessarily see the meaning, like what Tamar was saying, you just see the beauty. But what I liked about this poem so much is that usually poems tell a story. They're also a reflection of society, so they have a deeper message. But this was almost like a bit of metafiction in the fact that it was like giving a message about other poems. It was talking about the construct of poetry in general. Yes, it had this deeper message of this conversation that was happening about beauty and effortlessness and labor and all these things, which was obviously a reflection of society and still is a reflection of society. But even a further layer than that, it's talking about poetry in general, the constructs and the ways of poetry in general, which I thought was really cool.
So, and indeed, it is a meta poem about poems or a poem about poetry. Very well seen. Excellent comments. I see we're going to have a fruitful and high level experience all semester. So we're last three comments for now. Eden, then Ellen, and Nicole, and then I will wrap things up.
Something that I noticed after I read the poem a few times is to return to the point of that women must labor to be beautiful, is that it says to be beautiful and not necessarily to look beautiful, although it is definitely that, and it touches on that several times. The being beautiful part, I think, resonates even today when women talk about, we have to, be demure or be mild, as the poem mentions, talk less or talk softer, do things that are not necessarily focused on appearance to make ourselves seem more attractive or more socially accepted or less, the big words that people often associate badly with women, the bossy and the whatever it is, things that aren't inherently appearance-based, but still have to do with making a woman accepted or, again, beautiful.
I'm taking advantage of the chat also to respond to your comments as we do it, and thank you very much for that, Eden, drawing our attention to the feminist element, the gendered elements of this text, which are also quite crucial, quite essential to it. Last two comments. Ellen, I look forward to meeting you. I don't actually know who you are. And then Nicole right afterwards. And that'll be it.
Hey, so first of all, I agree with what everyone said so far. Every time I've read it, I've been able to see something different and feel something different. But what I wanted to say is that it almost feels like he resents the bankers and the schoolmasters and the clergymen. He talks about how poets will work harder than them, and all of the bankers, the schoolmasters, the clergymen, during their studies, they would have covered poetry, they would have read the books, they would have looked at the beauty of poems, and they still call it an idle trade. Is that what he says at the end? An idle trade enough. That even though they study it and they look into it and they use the poetry and they take messages away, it's still not appreciated. It's still not seen as something that's as important as everything else. And my second point is in Adam's Curse, generally the religious imagery of that when Adam and Eve were sent out of the Garden of Eden, man's punishment was that he was going to have to labor hard in order to achieve anything, in order to live his life. So anything that man is doing is going to be hard. Anything that brings fulfillment to a man's life, to a meaning to a man's life, is going to be difficult. No matter if that is physical labor or emotional labor or mental labor, all of it.
Excellent, wonderful points. I'm learning a lot from your comments, and I assume everyone you're seeing the insight of your colleagues as well, and it's also what we're going to be talking about in starting 10 minutes. The aspect, the property, the muscle of learning to listen to other people. The last comment is Nicole's, and I just want to say before Nicole speaks, I heard very distinctly in the last two speakers, although both were native English speakers, and this is all the more true for all of us, wherever we are in the world, you have to read these texts more than once. Notice how they said on repeated readings. When I read it a second time, I read it maybe a third time, but on repeated readings, and that is part of what also will distinguish poetry from this other category that we're going to talk about next week, prose. That density of language that Zara mentioned on Monday, it only opens itself, it cracks itself open when you work hard at it, when you read it a couple times. Nicole, last word, please.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the thing that drew my attention was actually not the part about beauty, but something that he said about the fact that poetry nowadays is not nowadays, back in his days, wasn't like something, a popular profession or something that people gave their admiration to. And I think that even though this poem has been written a long time ago, it's actually pretty relevant to today, because I think any of us who signed to this degree actually acknowledge the fact that it isn't the most popular thing. And although it isn't, we still see those reactions that people don't think that poetry is something that's worth as a job, as something to do. And although it was written a long time ago, we still see it today. So that's
Excellent.
that's
Excellent.
my point.
That's also, you've understood exactly why I've assigned this in our first week. I know that coming here is an act. Some of us felt we couldn't do anything but do this, sort of driven by a desire, a need, a personal drive. Some of us are doing it because it's convenient. I'm interested in English. I'm interested in the way that language works. I want a passport out of this country. All equally valid. And yet you had to overcome something. Maybe it was questions from your family, from people in your village, people in your community. Why would you do that? You should go studying computers. But coming here is not self-evident. Coming to this program, we aren't anywhere. We're on some server somewhere. But the desire to pursue this, as Nicole said, is something that requires going against the grain, going against the stream of conventional wisdom. And I find it indeed redemptive. I used a word that Sarah mentioned a few minutes ago, that this has been going on for at least 100 years. Here is William Butler Yates, major figure in the canon of Western or English literature, saying he felt the same thing in 1910, 110 years ago. And it has been a long-standing issue, how much more urgently in our day, but it is something that existed. To finish up this point, you heard the comments, and some of it I'm glad was built or elaborating on points that were raised in the video, that beauty, I'm going to go back to the screen for a second, the poem, that beauty is the product of labor. It is something that does not occur simply on its own. It is something that must be crafted, it must be shaped, it is something that is worked on. I'm just going to mute all again. Sorry, I hear some noise. And that is also in some ways related to the curse that man will, and there are two parts of, remember, Adam's curse, the curse in the book of Genesis, that man has to work hard at labor. It is to produce bread, but to create something in the world, it requires effort, back-breaking work. The noisy set down on their marrow bones, and that women are, this is a much more to our minds objectionable or complicated part of the problematic part of the curse, that women are in some ways subservient to men. It's also part of the curse of Genesis. The poem takes this in. It seems to be, and I never did this, but I never talked about the basic scenario, but this was apparent to all of you, but I'll mention it in case some more of us are working, or ourselves working hard to grasp what is at stake in this poem. The scenario is a group of friends. 3 are named in the poem. You can think of the scene in your mind, sitting in a garden in your back, or a stoop if you're from an urban area abroad, somewhere at the end of summer, maybe in a bar or outside a cafe, speaking in those long conversations late at night that some of you, I hope, are still able to have even these days, and speaking to them of what is most essential of poetry. I, again, the persona of the speaker, apparently someone like Yates, a poet perhaps himself, and it almost certainly is a man, says, "A line will take us hours, maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught." And our readers, Danielle, especially Danielle and Tamar at the beginning in the long sections, emphasized the lyricism and the prosody, words that we will come back to in about a month. The formal elements, not dressed up in tuxedo again, but the formal elements of what is built into the text to make it rhyme, to give it a meter, to make these words fit together, thought not, bones, stones. There clearly is a great deal of stylization, of crafting, of artfulness that goes into this poem. They're sitting together. This is the point that he makes. He makes it as metaphor, that poetry, and this is the main idea, the basic scenario. This speaker says to his friends, poetry has to seem as if it just took a moment. We can return to this idea. I'm actually going to use this line a few times over the course of the semester. It has to seem it just took a second to come up with it, or else all our stitching and unstitching, that's a metaphor. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks or so, as if our weaving together, and that's a long-standing metaphor for poetry. I'll just mention, by the way, that it's also in the Odyssey, your next major text in about 1 month's time with Professor Kolbrenner, that Penelope is weaving together this tapestry, the shroud that she takes out every night. So weaving is like poetry, is an ancient metaphor, but that's what he says. If it doesn't seem like the poem, the line itself was immediate, that took just a moment, then all of our effort has been for nothing. And it would be better to do all these other things, these hard work, these occupations that are considered, that are recognized, or I said somewhat problematic, it's not a great word, but are appreciated as labor by the world, whether it is menial labor, those cleaning the kitchens, cleaning the streets, or the high-end white-collar work of bankers, and in his day, clergymen and schoolmasters were very, there was a lot of prestige in those pursuits. Better to do those things. Better to be something where everyone recognizes, oh, that's your job, rather than something involved with ideas. That's his long statement from I said to the world, that the world doesn't appreciate how hard it is to create a line of poetry. I'll have one more thing to say about it. Then comes in this voice of one of the people he's talking to, the beautiful, mild woman. The man, we don't know what he looks like. Looks don't matter for the man, notice, and here's the whole feminist element. Eden drew our attention to it. It came up in a few other comments. Ellen and Gabriella also said things that touched on this. But that the woman whose voice is sweet and low, she's mild, she is beautiful, she's mild, so everything about her is externalized. And I was even saying to my wife that I read this as a more feminist text than she does. That to be born woman is to know, although they do not talk about it at school, that we must labor to be beautiful. Lana had her point. I said, well, this is somehow like a retort, a rebuttal to the man. That I know this, what you came to as an insight after your years of committing yourself to poetry, every single woman knows this. And then the man goes back, and that's all that she gets to say. I said, the persona of the speaker, we'll call him the speaker. You can say it's Yates, but more properly, we speak of the text, we speak of the speaker. The speaker replies, oh, it's certain there is no such fine thing, since Adam's fall needs much laboring. There's a reference to the Adam's curse. Oh, I know this. There have been lovers who thought to be, blah, 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 that they would sigh and quote with learned books, precedents of beautiful old books, yet now it seems an idle trade enough. The idlers, the beauty. Where does he anchor his knowledge that I know this already? You know this by being a woman. You know this by your identity, your lived experience as a woman. And he claims, oh, I know that. I know what it is to be a woman. I know that experience that you justify or you refer to in your life. How do I know that? Because I have read it. I've read about it in old books. I am not just a writer of poetry, not someone who does a lot of stitching and unstitching, but I've read the precedents. I've learned about learned looks out of old books. His knowledge of what it is to have, his knowledge of beauty is one that is read. It is a literary experience. The text seems to be, to my mind, and this is not Alana's reading, my wife's reading, maybe it's not yours, but there seems to be a critique. In some ways, criticism or even mockery of the speaker. He is someone who's devoted to beauty, but his understanding of beauty comes not from the mild woman sitting next to him, the mild, beautiful woman, but from reading old books. The conversation then ends. We grown quiet, the name of love. His whole understanding of love is mediated through his reading. Whether that is to celebrate it or whether that is to denigrate it, I don't know. I'll leave that to your own reading. And as Alana said, and some of you were saying this, maybe Tamar was agreeing with it, that the end of the text says that the natural world has this beauty, the trembling blue-green of the sky, the daylight dye, the moon, right? There is this standard of beauty that simply exists naturally in the world, because that is the way the world is created to us, which is also part of the Genesis creation or myth or understanding in our world. And man must labor to try to recreate them. That is the standard we try to capture. Let me get to the chat, and then I'm already 7 minutes late. I want to say one last thing. Both ways. Okay. Is he talking about the beauty of, that's a good point, Yunina. I don't know, I think it's that he tried to, that the woman is sort of naturally part of the world the way that men are not. The woman is more of a natural being, her beauty. But then she says, no, this natural beauty that you think is just, a woman, that he seems to celebrate the woman beautiful the way that the moonlight is beautiful. And she's saying, that's not, you have no understanding, man. You have no clue. And it's, oh, I like that idea. I never thought of that. That also is part of the curse. That someone said, oh, this is Ora saying that labor to be beautiful, that breeding, that the woman's privilege as to reproduce herself, which is actually also the Genesis curse. That is something to be beautiful. Beauty is something that is creative. Excellent idea. Okay, all good points. I'm not going to relate to all of them. I want to say one last thing in 2 minutes. So this is the more complicated idea that I said I would get to in the video, and here it is. That there are two forms of poetry, and we're going to talk about this again on Monday. I'm not going to do the PowerPoint today. I'm going to push that off again till Monday, when I will have another colleague joining us, Professor Shulak, our resident poet and expert in poetry, teaches the advanced class in poetry. And we will talk about this distinction that poetry has. We've talked about it in different ways. We're continuing this unit of what is poetry next week. One idea that this poem, and it's right here, urges us to consider is that there is a standard of natural language, the way that I'm speaking to you now, with no affected, no sort of artificial style or form to my words, simply communicating the way that you would talk to your friends on a late summer evening, if you were outside, or whatever image you have in your mind. And then there's something of art, something crafted, synthetic or artificial language, beautiful language. And poetry is beautiful. It is sculpted language. It is art that poses as natural speech. It is something that takes stitching and unstitching. It requires a great deal of effort. It requires labor. But the point of that labor, the objective, or perhaps the standard of its success, in my reading of this poem, as the poem seems to suggest, at least to me, and I am convinced of this, that the standard of success is to make beauty appear to be natural. What is beauty? Beauty is that which is created, which seems to occur of its own accord, that seems to happen on its own. It is to erase the labor, to take away, to make it seem invisible, to take all that effort and make it seem that this is your first draft. We read these poems, and this is something that also on Monday in our conversation about much more natural poems, much more conversational poems, casual poems by Billy Collins. He said, well, it's a lot of erasing, but you never get to see that erasing. The poem is the final product. And let's never be confused whether it's an academic writing, where you're learning to write essays. There is a lot of work in writing. There's a lot of work in ideas. The kind of work that you are doing right now at this minute is no less effortful than your friends and colleagues taking, Intro to Business. I'll use Intro to Business often as a kind of scarecrow, as the enemy, the opposite. But it's all made invisible. It's to seem effortless. to finish this, there's a great song, and I'll close with it today. A terrific song by Aretha Franklin from the 1970s, Natural Woman, right? This idea to be a natural woman. And she speaks, and there's actually, there is a classic of literary criticism that discusses this text. What is it to be a natural woman? And talks about it in queer terms of natural woman as a heterosexual, a sex object. But the idea of a natural woman as someone who rolls out of bed and looks like, I don't know who, I actually am too old. I don't even know who the starlets are of today. Let's say Emma Stone from 10 years
There are
ago.
no starlets, Daniel. That's from the 50s.
Oh, here we are. Oh, Professor Kohlbrenner's with us. And to look like that, to look like you are on the cover of, I don't know, Cosmopolitan or whatever it is.
Dr. Feldman, sorry, I just wanted to ask something. Between stanza 1 and stanza 2, when he speaks about stitching and unstitching and how, you know, a poem has to look effortless, and then you're talking about Aretha Franklin's song, Natural Beauty, I think the woman is also referring to that behind the scenes beauty takes a lot of work and a lot of effort.
Exactly.
However, there's, at least in the 2020 makeup, there's that natural makeup and that natural fashion that a woman needs to look beautiful, but it needs to also look effortless, the same way that so I think the woman is kind of linking the two ideas together, that while poetry takes hours of labor, it needs to look effortless, so does beauty, that natural makeup look, that natural woke up, got out of bed and looks perfectly put together.
Exactly.
And
the man has no clue, but he claims, yes, I know all about this because I've read about it.
Also the naivety of okay, most men, I don't want to be general, but you know, the naivety that a woman can put on some foundation and it looks completely natural, but you have no idea that she spent 30 to 45 minutes doing that morning.
That's exactly the point. That the natural makeup, I mean, the very contradiction, the paradox of that very term, natural made up, natural makeup.
Exactly.
An art that is aspiring to a natural, effortless beauty, a kind of standard of the natural world. And there's also idea of language and of ideas, that this is simply what I've thought. And it obscures, it erases all the hard work, all the listening, all the intellectual labor that you've just taken upon yourselves. Hopefully it won't feel backbreaking at all times, but it is just as significant. And here, Bill, we're going to get into our liberal arts sermon now. So the text, I'll go back just to share with everyone one last time, but that it has this hierarchy of social significance where there is what the poet does, what the mild woman in her low, sweet voice does, and if it is a failure, if the beauty is not successful, better go down upon your marrow bones, scrub a kitchen pavement like an old pauper, for to articulate sweet sounds together, to create successful poetry, to be a creator of a poetic sensibility, or perhaps even a reader, an interpreter of sweet sounds together, is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler. It is to be thought as idle by the noisy set of bankers, schoolmasters, clergymen, that the martyrs call the world, that the real world has no understanding. The poem makes a distinction between sweet sounds together and the noise of the world. And that's where I'm going to turn things over to you, Bill, Professor Kohlbrenner, of the effort that it takes, the attention to hear those sweet sounds together, to make sense of the sweet sounds of poetry, to turn yourself into a reader, maybe even a creator of poetry, despite the scorn of the noisy set that the martyrs call the world. So we're talking now, that's the end of our discussion of Adam's curse. We can now talk about the literature student's curse, and we're going to have just some conversation in general, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms where we'll talk about these things in private. Professor Kohlbrenner, the noisy set.
Dr. Feldman, which one of us is giving the sermon? I thought I was just coming to hear your sermon.
You can just say a few words and then I'm ready to go. I'm always raring to go about the sermon. I'm a preacher's son in my pocket, so.
I mean, I'm just connecting to what Dvora just said about this effortlessness, which it appears in Yates, but it goes back very, very far. And this is really a little bit about what we're talking about. Is when you study the Renaissance with me next year, we'll be studying Hobbes, whatever, some guy, Castiglione. He's a Spanish courtier, and he wrote a book called The Courtier, which is basically a guide to how to be a courtier. I mean, there's a book in the 50s called How to Make Friends and Influence People. And his advice is, Castiglione's advice is, act natural. Act natural, which is, it's a kind of paradox, meaning you have to learn, especially in the 16th and 17th century court, to look like you belong. And in order to look like you belong, you have to act in such a way as if you're naturally there. I mean, we point out, like, British royalty up until 20 or 30 years ago, when everybody started wearing Armani suits. If you look at Charles 20 years ago, he would always be wearing just, very, very casual clothing, because he never had to dress up, because you know who he is, because he's the prince. He doesn't have to show off. Any event. So I think, Daniel, that kind of, in some way, hooks into what we're talking about, that there are histories of reading, and in a way that sounds very boring, that we have to think about the past in order to understand the present. But I think one of the things that we do together in our classes is understand that through understanding the past, we actually see where we come from, and we understand our present a little bit better. You're talking about
payoff. What is the benefit?
What is the pay?
Why is it worth it?
What's the cost benefit?
What does one gain? What is the benefit?
So what do you do when you call up your parents and you tell them you're going to be an English major, and they say, "Are you sure?" How do you justify that? Did anybody have those conversations? I have to tell you guys, this is just way too early for me, and I have not had enough coffee yet. And I was kind of expecting a break. Do you have those conversations with your parents? Like, you sure you don't want to go to dental school? I mean, isn't that a better option?
I actually had the opposite experience. My mother was jealous. She's like, I want to do that degree.
Okay,
I had a conversation like that with my husband, who I married anyway. He was a business and finance major, and he laughed at me when I told him what I was studying.
Well, see, that's a very good arrangement, Tamar, because at least you have somebody in the family who's making money.
Right.
So we were discussing this in our classical backgrounds class as well, about what does it mean to become a good reader, and how does that? Daniel, why don't you take it away for a minute?
Yeah,
what do you think it means to become a good reader?
Yeah, and I think that part of what, I'm going to refer once more to this poem. Part of what the poet achieves is he's very taken with his own effort, his own talent, but he's not a very good listener, right? And part of what the poem does is it creates that irony. You understand the writer of the poem appreciates what the speaker of the poem does not. The writer is able to ironize, to create irony, that, oh, here's someone who is very devoted to poetry, thinks he knows everything about beauty, is kind of a fan. He's very, like I said, he's very confident in his ability to create those natural lines of woven, the tapestry of beauty, stitching and unstitching. He has no appreciation for what this woman is telling him. But the writer of the poem does, Yates, the actual, and this is why we talk of personas, the actual poet, the real creator of this text, does something that the persona of creating text, that the poet in the text does not. The first step, and this is why I think it's a message for us, the first step to becoming that reader and a writer eventually, since I'm sure some of you aspire to that as well, I still do one day when I grow up, is to become someone able to listen, a listener. You heard it when we started 15 minutes ago, the different accents, the different voices. You can hear already how many different perspectives.
One second, Dr. Dana, why is it so hard to listen? Well, everybody does that.
The noisy set. It is hard to listen. I have trouble listening to anyone. What do you guys think? Bill, I'll give you. What do you have to say about that? And that's what we're going to end today with. That
as observing and actually hearing what the other one has to say, instead of just like hearing the words and meantime you think of what you want to say back.
That's interesting. Right. I mean, I think listening is very, very hard because we often think, especially in the world we live in today, that listening to somebody else might threaten who we are. That's a very big problem in the American scene, and especially in the American Academy. And I know Daniel and I, we've talked about this a lot, how happy we are to be in Israel, because really a lot of students and faculty have the attitude that really I can't, if I say something that you don't believe in, I'm insulting you or affronting you or confronting you. And of course, here we very much believe in respecting other people's identities. We've talked about this a lot. But what we also believe, and I think this is what the humanities does, and then I kind of had a revelation about this, and this is really what in the Renaissance, what Christian humanists did. What are Christian humanists? Christian humanists were Christians, 16th and 17th century Christians, who discover the classical world, right? All of a sudden, they discover all this stuff they never knew before, right? For whatever reasons. Stuff gets published, Homer, Aristotle, Plato, all these great works. And they decide that they can read it and learn from it and stay who they are. That I think is just an amazing achievement. And we don't even think in those terms so much anymore because we're so concerned, especially if you're on social media, we're so concerned about maintaining our own identity. Dr. Feldman pointed this out to me, that at the beginning of social media, we all thought, oh, we're going to all expand our horizons and then we're going to meet so many people of different perspectives. But if you go on your Facebook page, who's on it? Everybody who you agree with. Instead of opening the world, it closes the world and we become more and more defensive. So I think that's another way, maybe that's what Dr. Feldman was referring to about how hard it is to listen, is that we're very defensive. Exactly. And the idea of actually reaching out to another, and this is why pedagogy and teaching and learning has to be a model for talking to each other. Because I always had this basic, I'm sitting in graduate school 10 or 20 years earlier than Dr. Feldman, and learning all these literary theoretical ideas about how to interpret texts, and always had this basic idea like, don't you want to, when you speak to somebody else, don't you want to be understood? And isn't the idea when you have a friend, you want to understand them? Why shouldn't that be the model with literary texts? And I don't agree with my friends all the time. Dr. Feldman and I have very furious disagreements all the time. Not really, but that's our model. We want to listen to each other, and listening to a text, listening to a voice from the past, especially or in the present, all these voices that you're listening to, both going back, and then I see from Dr. Feldman's syllabus, expanding the present horizontally. So we hear different voices, not only our own voices. That's an education, and nobody else in any other discipline, certainly nobody learns how to do that. No one else, I don't think, maybe philosophers.
Dr. Kohlbrenner,
yeah.
Can I say something as well about what you were saying? What you mentioned in your class on Monday, in that the ancient Greeks, to give something attention is to love it and to show your respect for it. And I think that connects with what you're saying now is if you're in your relationships, your friends, your family, your colleagues, if you have that respect for them and that love for them, you'll give your attention to try and listen and understand other points of view.
Right. I would even qualify it a little bit, because sometimes love is such an overused term. I know I used it, but I think attention itself, and I think we can understand this and caption it for ourselves. When we give somebody attention, it is a form of love. And we should see that in ourselves, that we're being generous and that we're giving to somebody. Giving your attention to somebody is a very big thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're practicing when we attend to these texts, when we listen to what these voices from the past, sometimes quite long ago, centuries, or in Professor Kohlbrenner's class, millenniums ago, or whether it's quite recent, but that the practice of attending to, that's what reading is transferable to our experience today, especially almost all of us living in such a complex and diverse country where listening is not prioritized, but the wealth of experience is there. I think listening is urgently called for. And that is what your skills that you are beginning to practice over this these coming weeks, this semester, and then following years, will add to the society, becoming someone who knows how to hear the other voices that surround us, to attend to them, not to agree with them necessarily and say, okay, I guess you're right, you've convinced me, but to engage them and to understand.
Can I ask you a question, Dr. Can I ask you a question, Dr. Feldman? Yeah, I mean, be serious, really. Like, you know, your parents come, or your whatever, your uncle says, "Why are you doing this?" And then they give and then you give the answer that you just gave, and then he says, "But what are you going to do with yourself in life?" Is there a pragmatics to this, or am I just being too business minded?
Can I say something? I think when someone questions like what's your reason for studying English literature or poetry, it's to understand that life isn't only business and science and computers, that without art and without culture, what keeps you entertained, what keeps you going in life. And also beyond that, being able to analyze and being able to look at things at a deeper perspective is not only going to help you, for example, in poetry or English literature or academic writing, when you get to a job interview, when you get to a discussion or a debate with someone, it allows you to look at things from an objective point of view. I can sit and listen to someone who has extremely different opinions to me and be able to care enough to listen to them. And listening is caring. It's not, oh, I agree with you, and okay, your opinion's different to mine, so like, let's agree to disagree. No, fully understanding, taking the time to care enough for that person and see where they're coming from, and being able to gain those skills from poetry and from academic writing or from, you know, the history, allows us to use those in so many other facets of life, like relationships, work, varying degrees. That's at least the answer I would give someone if they were to ask me what's my reason for studying.
There were a few more comments. Yeah, I think that Nicole wanted to speak, and then Hannah. Nicole, you have your hand up. I don't know what that means.
I actually did, but I didn't remember that I raised my hand. It's probably from beforehand. I just wanted to say that I get what Professor Coburn says, like, what's the practical use of it? You do earn the skills, like Deborah said, to excel in an interview, but what actually brings you to the interview? What are the qualities you do have to offer, except of those that you listen and that you're good at those things? I think that I am in the search and the question that Professor Kovarner said, and that I'm too debating on this myself.
Good. And Hannah, you'll have Hannah and Tamar, I guess. Hannah, Tamar, and that'll be it for today.
So I have a feeling that when I chose my degree, so I wanted to look for something that I like, because part of the decision is, of course, like a business decision, that what will we do with it. But in my feeling nowadays, in 2020 and even a little bit before, the question of what I like to do started to become more important, had a bigger portion in the decision. So my major, except of this degree, I'm a makeup artist and a hairstylist, which is different than what I'm doing over here, but it's also part of art. So when I chose the degree, I looked for what would I like to learn? What would be interesting to me? And I feel like it is a business decision, but you also need to decide what you like to do. For me, it's more important to sit 3 years and enjoy what I'm learning, instead of learning for 3 years, just like something that will give me money right away.
Dr. Feldman, I know you wanted to wrap up, and I only was allowed to be here for the half hour, but I do want to just say one thing. No, we have graduates from our program who are heads of tech companies, who I have a student now who's doing PR for a startup. We have teachers, of course. you'll all find your paths. And on the paths that you find, you'll find learning how to read. It's not just learning how to read books. It's learning how to read people. It's learning how to read situations. It's learning how to relate to people. In any place that you find yourselves, what we're learning here will benefit you. And that that cost benefit analysis is really foreign to us. We're really preparing you for whatever you decide to do. And especially in an international business world, having the skills that we have, not only the English language skills, but the creativity. I mean, the creativity that we bring to any kind of context, people are like, whoa, where did that come from? Because we're just practiced at it. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Feldman, for having me. Maybe you'll come and join. Will you be a special guest star in one of my classes one day?
With pleasure. Anytime.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Professor Colburn.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for being and
the rest
listening.
of you will see him later today.
And talking. Thanks for listening, and I'm just very happy to listen to you.
Tamar, you had one more thing you want to say?
I did. In sort of echoing what Dr. Kohlbrenner said, I think that as someone who was a student in this very department 25 years ago and just returning now, I have another career. I run a theater company, and I am a musician and a performer. But what I'm able to bring to the table in my other job and in my family life and with my friends is this way of examining nature and literature and things that my very bookish finance oriented husband is not capable of seeing on a day-to-day basis, but that he's learned to do from things that we discuss with each other. My perspectives have changed because of the things that I've learned from him and his from mine. And studying literature is not, if you're an island, then it's one thing, but you're not. You live in a world full of thoughts and ideas and professions, and what you're able to bring to the table because you're studying a piece of literature is it's enormous, and it can change perspectives of people around you, and you in turn can create other beautiful things, not necessarily the written word, but the sky's the limit. You have no idea.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And that too is part of what what the payoff or what the contribution is to your lives, the investment you're making in your lives through this form of education, being able to enrich yourself both materially, but also in a way spiritually, by being able to learn from whatever it is that you come into contact with. Each poem or each text you read in this program, each person that you meet is something that if you make yourself open to it, as Professor Kohlbrenner, if you learn to read it, read the world, read the people around you, and read the text in front of you, you'll become a far more versatile, creative, passionate, and capable human being. I say to people, I do the recruitment pitches online for this department, that we are not preparing you for your first job, but for your future. We're preparing you for jobs that may not even be imagined right now. And in such a dynamic and volatile world, where certainly who could have predicted where we'd be now in the fall of 2020, a year ago, when you started thinking about what to do this fall, when you started thinking about where to study university, this wasn't what you had in mind. That is crucial, to be able to prepare yourself to be nimble, as Sarah said, as some of you were pointing out, as Devorah said, to be able to approach any situation with an agility of mind, a creativity of purpose, and the capacity to reach other people. Those are transferable, those are bankable skills for your futures in whatever career you're going into, even in careers that might not be apparent to you. We don't believe in preparing yourself, giving you sort of vocational skills for the next 5 years. We believe in giving you the intellectual skills for the next 50. What we're going to do now, I'm going to turn off the recording. I wish you guys a good day. And I'm going to split whoever wants to stick around for about the next 10 minutes or so. That's it. I know you have class at 12 o'clock. If people want to drop out now, they got to run. Great, you'll do so. And anybody who wants to stay, I'm going to break up the remaining people, depending on how many people stick around, just into 10 breakout rooms of 10 minutes or so, just to meet each other, hear who you are, talk about whatever you want. You can talk about these issues. This is what I had to say to my father. This is what I said to my uncle, my mother, my girlfriend about coming here. the challenges you had to overcome, both personal and maybe even practical. Some of you have shared with me you're far flung, you're overcoming great challenges just to be here. There are cultural stigmas about studying here. Some people, my sister went here and had a great experience. Just talk about how you got to this day, and we'll do that in breakout rooms of however many people want to stick around just for the next 10 minutes until, for our time in Israel, 11:16, 11:17, 11:20 tops. All right, everyone, I will send you an email for next week, and you can already start looking tomorrow for the readings. We will have a homework. We will have a worksheet based on the essay that you've read for today. We discuss it today. We will discuss it on Monday. And there'll be a new slate of poems for next week. The worksheet and all that will be uploaded probably later today, and you can check it out tomorrow, and you'll have it all via a forum email that you'll receive soon. Take care, everyone, and anybody sticks around, I'll be roving around to those breakout rooms. Take care.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Dr. Feldman, the essay, is that the part of the essay or the essay in its
The
entirety?
part of the essay is what we're
that,
going to talk about in class. We're reading the
Uh-huh.
whole thing, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I meant to get to it today, but we didn't. Okay, take care. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.